Okay.
Today we're here with our latest environmental hero, Doug Smith, and we're really excited to be able to have him, interview with us. And actually, I'm really, happy because we're writing a children's book together that'll be coming out this spring. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and start with some questions. So, Doug, before we really get started with our interview, why don't you tell us just a little bit about you, just so the audience knows who you are.
Okay. Well, I'll backtrack. I just finished a career as a wildlife biologist in Yellowstone National Park. I worked there 28 years, retired a little bit over a year ago, and I think it was really cool because Yellowstone is the world's first national park, and I'm very proud to have worked for the National Park Service because they are the only land management agency in the United States that has preservation as their goal. And preservation means no use. The other is conservation, which is also worthy, but that's wise use. In other words, sustainable use through the years. At any rate, that's not about me, but that's what I did. And I was hired to reintroduce wolves back in 1994. And that's pretty much been my life. I studied wolves for about 15, 16 years before coming to Yellowstone. I studied them on an island in Lake Superior. If you ever look at Lake Superior, it looks like this, a wolf's head, and the eye of the wolf is Isle Royale. It's an island.
Oh,
And that's the longest running study in the world of a carnivore. It began in 1958. And I worked there for 9 summers and 2 winters. I worked in Northeast Minnesota with another wolf study, and I worked in Indiana with a captive pack of wolves. And that was my first wolf job at a place called Wolf Park. And my job, I know I'm a guy, but my job was called Wolf Mother. I actually hand reared 4 wolf pups. Sasha, Sergei, Mephisto, and Faust were their names. I slept with them. I bottle fed them. And this was to cause them to latch on to people so we could do behavioral research actually with them in their enclosure as they grew older. And so, all told, I've studied wolves for 44 years. I get tired and feel old just saying that. But that was my life. I will say in Yellowstone, I also was in charge of the bird program and the elk program. And those were great jobs too, in addition to wolves. But birds were really cool because I have been interested in birds. A lot of people don't know this, maybe before wolves. When I was a young boy, 5, 6, 7 years old, I would draw pictures of birds just in a very primitive way, but I loved them. So it was a great time. I enjoyed what I did.
so you've always loved animals, is what it seems to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that is my dad had a camp. He bought an old farm that failed, couldn't grow crops anymore, and turned it into a camp. So his whole life was teaching kids about nature. And I was one of his pupils.
Oh, wow. So did you have brothers and sisters too? Were they
I
like,
have one sister, and then two what we call half brothers, who both of them passed away. They're older than me, but we shared a father, had a different mother, so half brothers.
and so they loved animals as much as you, or
We all did.
oh,
Yeah,
that's great.
our father, who we had in common, his life was nature, and so we all got that bug.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you for that, Doug. And so we're going to go ahead and start with our interview. So you kind of really, went through the first question that we're asking because we were asking you what made you choose, working with wildlife as a career. I mean, is that what, when you grew up, is that what prompted you to go into working in this area or as a wildlife biologist?
Yeah, it did. My upbringing very much made me decide to go work with wildlife. I actually, when I went to college, I started off as a forestry major because I love forests and woods and trees. I went there as a small boy to retreat, to find solace, even when I was very young. So I actually entered college as a forestry major. But when I was in high school, I also worked in a fish hatchery. My dad died when I was 15, and so I kind of lost his camp, and that hurt very much. And I found other outlets, and I found a teacher, a mentor, who ran a trout hatchery. And so I almost majored in fisheries.
Huh.
So that was really weird. Was going to be a fish person. I was going to be a tree person. And then it's that Wolf Park Wolf Mother job. And that job led to Isle Royale, the Eye of the Wolf. After my first summer after high school, I got that Isle Royale job. I was only 18. I still to this day can't believe they hired a kid who hadn't even gone to college yet.
Hmm.
And so when I started college, I went into the office and said, I'm changing my major from forestry to wildlife. So I guess you could say wolves changed my life.
Wow. And for sure. I mean, look at where you're at right now. So,
Well, I was lucky. I was lucky.
so tell us a little bit about the history of wolves in Yellowstone and where things are now.
Well, that's a tough story. I'm very proud, as I said, Yellowstone's the world's first national park, 1872. But the mindset of people at the time was still all predators are bad. And the main predator in North America, Africa, it's different main predators, lions, leopards, cheetahs. But in North America, the main predator is wolf. We do have cougars, we do have bears, but wolves were everywhere. And they were really the big bad wolf is not an overstatement of how people viewed wolves when Yellowstone was made a park. So even though the idea was to set this land aside, all predators were considered bad and wolves were considered the worst. So they went on a predator killing campaign and all the wolves were killed off. The last wolf was killed. There is a number, 1926. Some people debate that, but wolves were killed from the entire Western United States by the 1930s. Most of the cougars were gone too. They tried to kill all the coyotes, but coyotes are wily, as you know, from the Coyote and the Roadrunner program. They didn't get them all, but they got most of them. So Yellowstone was kind of a predator-free landscape for the first part of its history, and that's very important because everyone thinks Yellowstone was established so early that it's a pristine park, and pristine means in its natural condition, untouched, and really that's not true. The only thing that made it seem like it was pristine is it was never developed. There was no logging, ranching, farming, mining, shopping centers and plazas. And there's not many places in the United States like that. Maybe Alaska, but not the lower 48. So this idea that Yellowstone was a perfect representation of nature and wildness is not true. We altered it. And it really didn't, Yellowstone's as good as it's ever been right now because it took most of its history to fix what we did at the beginning.
Hmm.
And even though the bears weren't wiped out, their populations were reduced. And this had what we call ripple effects. Like throwing a rock into a pond, the ripples go out. Well, that's what happens when you take out the predators, wolves and cougars and bears. And it really changed Yellowstone. Even though on the surface, the scenery was great, below the surface, no, no. And so, I grew up thinking nature has value unto itself and all the parts need to be there. So that's why I really was happy to be hired to do the wolf reintroduction. And it took, a couple decades for them to really return to their original role. The cougars came back on their own. The bears were never eliminated. All of that affected the elk. There were too many elk in the park. People always think more is better. That's not always true, especially in nature. I'll use the word balance. Balance sometimes is misunderstood in nature because nature goes up and down and sideways and all over. But what I mean by balance in this case is there weren't enough predators and there were too many elk.
Hmm.
And too many elk meant they ate themselves out of house and home. And so it was not a natural system. And so now that the predators are back, the elk population did decline. Some of the plant communities are coming back. You know, in this day and age, most of the environmental news that we hear is bad, you know, with climate change and plastic in the oceans and, you know, all these things. Yellowstone's actually might be as good as it's ever been. And a lot of that has to do with wolf recovery and other carnivore recovery. So it's a great story. And the hopeful part of it is nature can be restored. You just got to give it a chance.
Hmm. I guess during COVID, we saw some of that too, with, everybody was, stuck in their houses and the wildlife came out,
It did. We
So
documented that in Yellowstone, actually.
were you able to see quite a bit of that when you were
Oh,
there?
yeah. We had radio collars on wolves and elk and bison, and they started coming closer to the road, spending more time by the road, coming into developed areas. It was a strong effect, really. And it did, you know, it happened like that.
Huh. That would have been that would have been a lot of fun to see that actually, because I know that in Colorado, some of the, I guess Rocky Mountain National Park, the elk were coming through, just in town and everything, and it was pretty interesting. So, but so, we, Stephanie and I were discussing about the fact a little bit about your history, and we found out that you did your PhD on beavers. And
Right.
so we wanted to know a little bit about that and why you did that, and have you really used it?
Oh, yeah. I would say all education's good. I'm a fan of school, just because it makes you think about the world and it expands your mind. But, you know, I don't want to make this sound bad about beavers, but I did my PhD on beavers because I couldn't get a wolf PhD.
Oh,
I was kind of, this sounds bad too, but obsessed with wolves. But you know, you don't always get everything you want. I'm not trying to quote the Rolling Stones here, but I couldn't get a opportunity with wolves for my PhD. And so you can do one of two things. You can not get a PhD, or you can say, what are other ways I could learn? And that happened to be beavers. And what was good about that is I became intimately familiar with beavers, and I think they are one of the coolest animals I've ever studied because, you know, I have to say, anything you get to know in nature, you will find fascinating. And I'm not saying that to be some kind of, you know, guru about do this, do that. Go out in nature and connecting with a plant or an animal of any kind, even a rock. I've talked to Native Americans that used to say, I used to go out into a meadow when I was a kid and sit with the rock all afternoon. So beavers, I didn't want to do, I did because of an opportunity presented itself. I ended up studying them, and they're about as fascinating a critter as you can find. And what they taught me is never give up. Everyone who's ever studied a beaver is impressed by their perseverance. And that's how I got through my PhD. I don't consider myself that smart, but I got through because I acted like a beaver, which was I just kept at it. And that's what beavers do. You can rip their dam apart and they'll fix it and act like they're not even frustrated. They'll act like it's no trouble. They'll repair it in a night and keep doing it, and they keep going. And they taught me maybe one of the most important lessons of my life, perseverance.
Wow.
So yeah, I backed into my beaver PhD.
Hmm. That's great. And the beavers are coming back in Yellowstone too, or they came back too.
You know, the interesting thing about beavers and wolves, and this was not planned, the word that we use is serendipity, is they're alike in many ways. They live in family groups. For wolves, they call them packs. For beavers, they call them colonies.
Hmm.
They both have territories. And most animals live on home ranges. Territories are defended against other of your kind. Home ranges overlap, they're not defended as much. And they're both keystone species that is so key. And what I mean by keystone species is a species that doesn't occur in high numbers of animals, but given the number of animals there are, their impacts are widespread.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, like I was talking about Yellowstone, Yellowstone is a totally different place with and without wolves, even though there's only roughly 100 wolves in Yellowstone. There's in the summer probably 25,000 elk in Yellowstone,
Oh,
several thousand deer, 4 to 5,000 bison, yet 100 wolves. There's 150 bears in Yellowstone. So not many wolves, yet so much what happens because of them. Beavers, they only live in the waterways, which is a small percentage of the land, or the area, I should say. And they make a dam, and the dam creates a pond. The pond creates water for other animals come to. The water table, which is the water that's underground, comes up so other plants can put their roots into it. We talk about sticking their feet into the water below the ground. And so that creates different kinds of vegetation. So it becomes a hot spot for other types of wildlife and plants and insects. So beavers and wolves taught me a ton together because of these commonalities. So it was really lucky
hmm,
that I owe a lot to both species, really.
hmm. That's interesting. Um, so, most people know you as kind of like the wolf guy, and
No
and so
beavers.
yeah, no beavers. And so I was just curious, or we were just curious, how did you end up being the main wolf biologist in Yellowstone National Park? I mean, how did that happen?
Luck and perseverance.
Hmm.
Luck and perseverance. I mean, truly, I mean, it was I started writing wolf biologist when I was 15 years old. And that was 1975. I hate to age myself here. Um, but this was in the day and age where there were far fewer people in the world. This is a situation I'm not quite sure how to deal with now, but they wrote back amazingly. And these are handwritten letters,
Wow.
I'm writing a piece of paper. And they said I have nothing for a 15-year-old, which I understand. And then at 18, I wrote them back, all the same wolf biologists. And about half of them wrote me back. And one of them was this guy from Wolf Park. He was a professor at Purdue University in Indiana. And he said, this was a clever decision on my part. I said, I don't want a job. I don't even want a volunteer job. This is a school project. And it was. My high school, at the end of your senior year in high school, you could leave to do a project. They called it a senior project. And he asked me I grew up in Ohio, and this was Indiana. I drove over. He interviewed me and said, come back for your senior project and be a wolf mother. And so I did that. And that literally was my foot in the door, because that job led to my job in Isle Royale. I went from my senior project to Isle Royale. Um, and I hiked around for 9 summers in Isle Royale, 2 winters. And then I went to Minnesota for a winter to work with wolves. And then I got a PhD studying beavers. And all of that took 15 years. Sounds easy, but it was a long slog. And the whole way, I never knew where it was going to end up. I never knew what was going to happen to my life. But the key was I loved what I was doing. And so I did not care where it ended up, because each day I loved it. I was going out in the field, mostly studying wolves or beavers. And I got lucky in the end, because the Yellowstone job came open. Okay, the government decided they're going to reintroduce wolves. I just applied for the job, and I had worked for two very famous wolf biologists. Rolf Peterson led the Isle Royale study, and Dave Meach led the Minnesota study. And at the time I applied, they were considered the top two wolf biologists in the world at that time. They might not be now. And they both wrote me recommendations,
Wow.
which I
That's
think
great.
helped a lot. And I was crafty. I don't know if I should call it crafty, but the whole time I worked for both of them, I never asked them for anything. Not one recommendation. If they said I can pay you, I took it. If they said they couldn't, I took it. And I pieced together a living that way. And then when I applied for the job in Yellowstone, I called them both on the phone and I said, here's my one request. Can you write me a recommendation? And they both said, yeah. And in fact, they both picked up the phone and called Yellowstone on my behalf.
Wow.
And I think that's what did it, to be honest.
Wow, that's great. That's super. You
I
know,
got lucky.
you saved your request to the end there with these
I
guys.
did.
Yeah.
I did. And I didn't know what it would lead to. And so if whoever's listening to this is sometimes you got to make strategic decisions like that. And don't ever forget, be like a beaver, don't ever give up.
That's great. So, what kind of things did you do leading the Yellowstone Wolf Project? And did you ever think you would, get to do this kind of work? I guess,
No, I didn't. I really do feel lucky and blessed. But the main thing I did was let wolves be wolves. You know, they they just need half a chance and they'll do the rest. So really what happened was the wolves made. Me look good, you know. And the other thing I believe in a lot is I didn't jump around much in my career. I worked 28 straight years in Yellowstone, and a lot of careers you do this something for 10 years and you do something else for 10 years. And so what that allowed me to do was to, how do I say it? I was just on the job while the wolves were doing things. And so I noticed it and I recorded it and I wrote about it. And I think that's what made it a success. And then what I realized was, and I grew up in the Midwest, and the stereotype of someone growing up in the Midwest was you never self promote, you never talk about yourself. But what I began to realize was wolves can't talk for themselves. And Yellowstone, just because it's Yellowstone, gets a ton of attention. And it took me 10 or 15 years to figure this out, but I can speak for the wolves with the platform Yellowstone gave me. And so, despite my Midwestern upbringing of never talk much or promote yourself, I said, I'm going to use Yellowstone to talk about wolves and write about them and, expose the science of what we're learning about them. And so I think I just took advantage of a good situation.
yeah, well, that's great. You know, and we'll talk about this later, but doing this book with you, I've learned a lot about what you've been able to do out there, and it's really fascinating. I just can't even imagine being able to have those opportunities that you had in Yellowstone.
It
You know,
was fun. It was
so
fun.
um, so what has been your most memorable encounter with wolves?
Oh boy. Well, there's a few. I mean, one of them was, you and I are writing about wolf number nine. Um, and this is a tough story because it involves the president of the United States at the time. And I don't want to make this like a partisan interview, but Bill and Hillary Clinton were on their way to visit Yellowstone. They were vacationing in Jackson, Wyoming, which is close to Yellowstone, and we had the wolves in the pen, or we thought we did. A windstorm had come through and blown the trees down on the pen. Number nine's mate, number 10, had been poached, so he was shot and killed. So we thought she needed help raising her pups. So we caught her and dug her pups out of a rock den. We've written about that in your new book. We brought her and her pups to the pen. Trees fell over, damaging the pen. The pups got out. Number nine didn't. The hole wasn't big enough, or she was wary of us. But we set these small, what they're called soft catch traps
By
because
the
they have
way, the
rubber
mic's off right now.
pads.
Excuse
To
me,
turn it
sorry,
back on,
sorry,
press the button. The mic's back on.
sorry. Okay, Right.
So we had these, what they're called soft catch traps, which had rubber on their jaws to catch the pups by their foot and put them back in the pen. Well, we had those traps set around the pen, and the president of the United States was going to walk up to the pen in a few hours with the first lady. And I was up at the pen by myself, snapping the traps. It was like, probably shouldn't have any traps with the president coming up. And so I had my head down, taking one of these traps out of the ground, and I had a chain link. This is the fence, and Nine and her pups that we caught were inside the fence, but it was still just a few feet away. She had come up to the edge of the fence while I had my head down. And it was one of those moments, how we ever feel like something's there, even though you don't see it. Well, I felt that, and I lifted my head up, and there was number nine, a few feet away. I was by myself. It was just the two of us. And we looked in each other's eyes. And the thing that was interesting about that, she chose to come over because the pen was an acre large. She could have stayed on the other side of the pen. She came over. I looked because I felt her presence. Looked up. There she was, our eyes locked. And for, I can't remember, but several seconds, we're just looking at each other. And then she slowly slipped away quietly. And, my whole life, why did she come over there? It would have been easy to stay away, but she came over and looked at me. And, you never forget moments like that because it was up to the wolf to come over.
Mm.
And then I got to say, locking eyes with a wolf is life-changing.
Wow.
You never forget it. I mean, I know you look people in the eye, and that has a strong effect too. People don't always make eye contact. It's just the way we are. But try doing it with a wild animal,
Mm.
and they choose to do it. That makes you a different person.
Wow. And she knows you, didn't she? I mean, she's been around you, so she knew you.
I think you're right. I do think you're right, Sylvia, but I never like to be presumptuous and know what she thought, but I took care of her for months. And so she probably knew my smell very well, probably knew my voice, but I don't know. That's me presume. They're very intelligent, perceptive, feeling animals. And so for me to say, she knew me, I'm pretty sure she did, but I would never like to, be that arrogant and say, oh yeah, for sure. That's like her life.
Mm. Well, you have been a mother before, Doug. So, I mean, I don't know. That would be really amazing, though, because I've looked at the wolves like at the Discovery Center and, just up close and just looking at them, their eyes, they're just
Oh
really
yeah,
like magical almost.
it
It's
is.
really crazy. So I
It's
can't.
totally crazy. Yeah.
So did President Clinton enjoy his trip to see the wolves?
I think he did. Hillary was there, and their daughter is escaping my mind.
Elsie.
Chelsea was there. But, the Secret Service wasn't crazy about them. We took them in the pen
Oh,
with Nine and her pups. And the Secret Service literally said, this is the leader of the free world. Um, I don't think this is a very good idea. And we said, no, nothing's going to happen. The wolves are not going to attack the president of the United States. We can guarantee it. And they were like, you better be right. And they didn't. They didn't. And what I did was the pups had Nine stayed out in the pen, but the pups ran into a kennel box, basically a doghouse. And the top, you could lift up the top. And I lifted up the top and showed them the pups. And I said to them, they don't look that mean or bad to you, do they? And they said no. And I said that because, wolves, for many people, a lot of people hate them. They have a terrible, and they think that they're bloodthirsty killers. And so I was aware of that image that wolves have. And I lifted up the kennel box and said to Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea, they don't look that bad, do they?
Wow. Wow. That's quite the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you're kind of leading into the next question because we wanted to ask you, what do you think, why do you think people really, what's misunderstand wolves? I mean, there's so much of that out there right now.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it's because we want to be top dog. We want to be rulers of the earth. And wolves are top predators too, and we do a lot of the same things. We live in family groups, we make close social ties, we're good communicators, and we both kill. We to live we have to kill, to live they have to kill, and we don't want competition about that. And when you're so alike, um, yeah, you want to be the top dog without anything. And then oddly, somehow myths took root early. Little Red Riding Hood, Three Little Pigs, Wolf at the Door, Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, um, negative wolf references go back to the time of the Bible. And that just started a bad kind of storytelling trajectory. None of it based on what wolves are really like. And so I think culturally, many different societies, cultures cast wolves in a negative light.
Mhm.
And and that took hold. And so before anyone really got to know them, they're killing. And then the other thing too is, humans clashed early in Europe and parts of Asia, Russia primarily. And so then when European humans colonized North America, they had a negative attitude about wolves when they got here. And wolves they considered to be the antithesis of civilization. Um, and when you're a colonist, you want, it's a howling wilderness. When Europeans came to North America, it was wild, it was tough, it was rugged. And so you killed wild animals to eat. Well, so did wolves. Well, you didn't want them taking your food away from you. And then, of course, we brought, sheep and cows. And when we took natural prey away from wolves, the only thing left to eat was sheep and cows. And then, we wiped out the buffalo. Some people call them bison. That was the wolves' natural prey. So when they lost the buffalo and the bison, what did they eat? Cows. We got rid of buffalo and bison to have cows, and wolves ate them. And so they we had a mythology in place that hated wolves, and then we had a culture, civilization in place where wolves competed with us. I think that's what ended up happening.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. Well, it kind of leads into, what's been going on recently, and it's been all over the news. And, there was a man in Daniel, Wyoming, who supposedly tortured a wolf before killing it. And I know that this kind of stuff happens in a lot of different places. I guess, of course, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, and, what can we do to make a difference in how people would treat an animal like this?
Yeah, no, I did hear about that. And that is very disturbing. Um, because it's not really thinking that wolves are another living creature. And I'm very unfamiliar with that mindset. I mean, all you have to do is have a dog and know, if you want a wolf, get a dog. And so, and dogs, all dogs are derived from wolves. And so, if you do something bad to your dog, how the dog reacts to it, feels about it. So to be able to do that to a wild animal, to me, is just a thought process I'm not familiar with. And, I'm not, hunting is a big part of our culture, and that's different. That's part of humans' history is hunting. What that person did is not that. He ran it over multiple times with his snowmobile, not killing it, but injuring it so severely that it just laid there. And then he taped its mouth and brought it to his house and then a bar. And that is just kind of sick behavior, because you're not thinking of that animal's pain, misery, or feelings. And so I really don't understand that at all. And the hard part is when you say, how do we stop it? Is, human nature is we don't like outsiders telling us what to do. So the state of Wyoming has a certain policy towards wolf management, and they don't like it when outsiders from elsewhere from Wyoming criticize them and tell them what to do. So what human nature does is it digs in. If people from New York City and Los Angeles criticize people from Wyoming, they resent it and don't change. They actually become harder to the way they are. And, so I'm not sure what the solution is, because torturing animals needs to stop. That is just not ethical or proper wildlife management. So how do you get it to stop if you're immune to outside criticism? I understand that being criticized is unpleasant and you don't like it. I've tried to learn from that myself. Like as a scientist, I write a lot. You know this, Sylvia, because we're working a book together. And when you write in and say, I don't like what you wrote, it's wrong, it hurts. It's personal. But it might be true.
Mhm.
Revising your writing to make it better is probably a good thing. So revising your management policies towards animal cruelty in the state of Wyoming needs to be done. And I think people need to just be like, okay, the New Yorkers and the Californians, I don't care they're from someplace else. Fundamentally, what we're doing is wrong. But I'm afraid what's going to happen is this story's gotten a ton of press. And I think it's going to cause Wyoming to dig in. And that's what I'm fearful of. But supporting or allowing for animal torture and cruelty to occur. I mean, I saw pictures of that wolf in the bar, and it's appalling. And then he takes it out back and shoots it in the head with a pistol. It's hard to understand, and I'm really trying to understand it.
And I think we talk about Wyoming. I live in Idaho, and Stephanie lives in Montana, and you look at it, and when I started kind of learning more about the canines, the wild canines, the wolves and the coyotes, and I was shocked to see that. I mean, that kind of behavior is part of like the killing contest that they have with coyotes and stuff. And I didn't even know that that exists in multiple states. And so when you're talking about like New York and California and some of these other outside people from other states, that if they look within their own state, those things might be happening there as well because they
Yeah,
have,
good point. That's
you
a
know,
good point.
and so so because it makes me think, well, maybe it's time for we have this one wolf that gave his or her life, and hopefully it's not in vain. That makes a difference.
I think what the difference might be, that's an excellent point, Sylvia, and I don't have anything to modify it, but I do have something to add to it. I don't think it's legal. Well, you don't have wolves in New York and California, but you do have coyotes in both those states. It's not, and look, check me on this, see if I'm wrong. I don't think it's legal to kill them by running them over with snowmobiles.
Mhm.
And, if Stephanie lives in Montana, uh, you're allowed to run wolves and coyotes over with snowmobiles in Montana and Wyoming. That's not illegal. And there have been several politicians in the legislatures. Well, Montana, I know for sure. I don't know about Wyoming, who have tried to ban this practice, to make it illegal to kill a wolf or coyote by running them over with a snowmobile. And they haven't made the bill didn't get out of committee. If the young people watching understand, that means it doesn't even go to the entire legislature to vote on. And all the bill said was you can't kill coyotes and wolves by running them over with a snowmobile. For me, that's that, and I don't think New York and California allows that kind of stuff. So that's where, the pot isn't calling the kettle black,
Mhm.
if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
It deals with humane treatment of other life forms. We know this, for example. We know this. Wolves and coyotes feel pain and they have fear. That's been well documented. And so, why not, as humans that control their fates, we respect and understand that? That doesn't mean you can't hunt with a gun, which is, usually a quick death, not a slow, drawn out death. That's just respecting basic biology, psychology, nerves. They feel, you get run over by a snowmobile, it's gonna hurt. And I think that's where, when you say, other states are being hypocritical, uh I don't know if they are on this one.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. I think I was thinking more along the lines of some of the killing contests. You know,
Yeah, no, that's true. Most Western states have predator killing contests, which I personally think should be banned as well. I
yeah.
think hunting is ancient with human societies. What is hunting for? You're obtaining a natural resource. You need food, you need clothing, you need materials to, the bones from the animals to make tools. I think that's a legitimate use of wildlife. The killing that we've done when our technology was primitive wasn't always humane either. I admit that. The history of killing things it's rough, but people were doing the best they could with the materials they had, and they were doing it to survive. This is not that
Mhm.
at all. This is not that at all. And we know more about animal life now. Why continue to behave that way? This is not Aboriginal humans, killing things with a spear or a rock. We understand what we're doing now. And, all of us are going to be at that moment at the end of our lives. How do you want it to be?
Yeah.
You know, being tortured, or, having a better moment, and you got to think through. I know this sounds horrible, but you got to think through that.
Yeah. Well, I guess, like you said, it's all over the news. We'll see where it goes.
Oh, so I mean, I did an interview not today. I'm sitting here at my desk getting ready for our meeting. That's why I'm always ill prepared for your calls, is because I'm trying to do the homework you gave me, and I got a fourth call from a newspaper for a quote. So, and I have friends who work in Wyoming for the wildlife agencies, and I try not to criticize friends, but this one, no, no. I'm it's what happened there is wrong, and the laws of Wyoming partly allowed it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully change happens, you
I
know,
agree.
so. And so when we're talking about some of the laws, I know that they had, looked at delisting wolves and that kind of thing, and that the Northern Rocky states haven't done that, or I guess they were listed and now they're delisted. What are your thoughts about, the laws there and the protection for wolves?
God, I thought this was going to be a straightforward interview.
Sorry.
You're asking tough questions. So I think the purpose of the Endangered Species Act is to prevent extinction. And wolves in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming are not in danger of extinction. And I won't mention names because they probably would not like me to, but a lot of wolf biologist friends of mine don't think wolves should be relisted in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. And that's because of what I was just talking about. When you have a faraway entity, i.e., the federal government, telling you what to do in your backyard, human nature is you don't like it. So having wolves managed by local people is always better than having wolves managed by people in Washington, D.C. or Denver. Um, and so the question is, are wolves in danger of extinction right now in those three states I mentioned? And the answer is biologically no. A lot of other people, however, feel that the management policies, and we were just talking about this, the management policies towards wolves in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming are not good.
Mhm.
And they're not respectful of wolves. Uh, and they could lead to extinction sometime in the future. So we better do something now. And those folks want wolves relisted, basically because they think the states are doing a bad job.
Right.
Because killing wolves in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming is really easy, as I just discussed. But Idaho and Montana are right there. I mean, Montana allows hunting at night with lights. It allows baiting wolves. It allows snaring wolves. Idaho, in some places, has almost year-round hunting. They're going to allow aerial hunting. They're putting bounties on wolves. And a lot of people feel that's too much killing. And so if the states aren't going to be responsible caretakers, they shouldn't have the authority to manage wolves, and it should go back to the faraway powers. That is the dynamic there, and that's what's creating the conflict. And so, as a biologist, I have to say wolves aren't going extinct anytime soon in the tri-state area. Are they being killed a lot so wolves aren't living in their natural family units? Yes, that's true too. So I'm of the mind that the management policies need to be revised by the states. I don't know how you get them to do that because they're kind of dug in too, but not have the wolves relisted yet. Because this is a cultural biological problem. And that's really hard to explain. So I hope I'm doing a good job with that. But that, I mean, we've got to work through what people want and what's responsible wildlife management. Those two things.
Well, Doug, I couldn't help myself but ask you additional questions since I have you. So, so no, we just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because I've heard so many, sides saying we need to relist them. Why are the wolves treated differently in the northern states versus the other states, and so that was the basis of that question. So, it's kind of funny because I try and call you periodically and you're always super busy.
Sorry
And
about that.
I wanted to know, are you really retired? You know?
No, no. I mean, it's a long story why I retired. And some days I wish I hadn't, but a lot of it was a personal decision and my wife and things like, wolves, when you study them, it's your life.
Mhm.
That's all you do. And so she had grown, and there's other reasons too. But what's happened now is I have a whole new set of jobs. I just have more flexibility. When I worked for the federal government, you got to be at work every day at 8, and you got to stay till 5. And most days I stayed later. And you have to, a lot of times I worked on weekends. You had a very rigid, demanding schedule. And now it seems like I have almost um, as much to do. But like, for example, I went for a walk with my wife before this phone call, you know, and when you're working for an 8 to 5 job, you can't do that. You can't do it. And so the rest of the afternoon, I have a ton of stuff to do. But, if my wife walks in at 3 and says, it's Friday, let's go do something, I can go, sure. But the stuff that's waiting for me to do, I still have to do it,
Yeah.
because I'm a National Geographic Live speaker. I'm still fundraising on behalf of Wolf Research. I'm still doing a lot of interviews. I'm doing a couple TV shows on conservation.
Mhm.
Not all of them deal with wolves. I'm doing more writing. I just had a new scientific publication come out on wolves. I'm an editor for a special issue on a wolf conference, so I'm having to read a whole bunch of other people's papers about wolves. Uh, yeah, I have a field trip to lead next week in Yellowstone. That's going to take 2 full days. So it's real busy, but the key difference is I have more control over my own life now. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's been really interesting getting to know you and your experiences, and it's just what a life, you've been able to have, So really thank you very much for the time that you gave us today, and I look forward to seeing you in the park. So,
Me too. Thank you, Sylvia, for being so patient with me all this time.
oh, I forgot one last thing, that we're working on a book together too. So it's really exciting.
Right. How could I leave that off the list? Yes.
Yeah. So it should be coming out pretty soon, and it's called the Yellowstone Wolf Matriarchs, and I'm really looking forward to it. We have a wonderful artist. His name is Andreas Wessel Thurhorn. He was a Disney artist, so I'm really thrilled. I think
It
it's
looks great. It looks great.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Yeah.